Hello friends and welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing every single thing that I read in January, and I read a lot in January. I actually got off to a very good start of the year for my reading, so I'm excited to discuss all of these things with you. They're also just like all over the place. My reading this month was like absolutely chaotic. Before we jump in, I do want to say a quick thank you to Allplay, the sponsor of this video. More on them in just a moment. But like I said, we have a ton of books to discuss today, so I want to get started. So grab yourself a tasty beverage, get comfy, and let's jump in. But first, a moment of your time, if I may. So as many of you know, I have my own publishing imprint called Easy Cat Press. So far, we have released two books, which were House of Frank by Kay Sinclair and Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove. And on March 3rd, which is just like a month away, we're going to be releasing our third book, which is Black as Diamond by U.M. Agawike. This is a gritty, dark fantasy adventure. I've compared it a lot to Final Fantasy. When I first read it, my first impressions of this book were that it was a Final Fantasy adventure with like Mortal Kombat style fight scenes. So it's like very gritty, very aggressive, but it also has this like great adventure aspect to it. If you love complex, dark fantasy worlds, if you love queer characters, if you love found family, if you love dark fantasy, if you love any of those things, and if you love them all together, you are going to love this book. So obviously the reason I'm showing you this before we jump into everything else is that there are three important things that you can do to really help with the success of this book, and two are completely free. So first one that's free, add this book to your want to read or to your shelves on Goodreads and Storygraph, or on both. You have no idea how much adding a book to your shelf helps a book's success. I know it seems simple and silly, and it doesn't seem like it does anything, but it helps authors so much. So if you get a chance today or in the next month, please consider adding this to your shelves. It really helps us out a lot. Number two thing, also free. You can join my Bindery page. So Bindery, if you don't know, is very much like Patreon, but for books. It is where I am able to do all of the publishing that I do. It's like Patreon, so there are paid subscription levels, and those levels do get you pretty cool things, but there's also a completely free tier, and I provide most of the content over there to everybody, regardless of tier, even if they're on the free tier. And then, of course, people who like do the paid tiers get some extra fun goodies, but even joining for free over there and keeping up to date with all the books I'm publishing, including Black as Diamond, is super helpful. And did I mention that Easy Cat Press members also get early access to that's right, all of my YouTube videos? Please consider go checking that out. I'll put a link to it in the description of this video. And third thing, I did mention that one of these things was not free. The third thing is, of course, consider pre-ordering the book. Listen, I know I am also someone who's very bad at remembering to pre-order books, but if this book interests you at all, please consider pre-ordering it. It really helps us out a ton. It helps signal to bookstores, whether that's your local indie bookstore, whether that's a Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy books, I don't care. It helps signal to them that this is a book that people are excited about, and it really helps us out just immensely. So those are the three things you can do. You can do one of them, you can do all three of them. Any little bit of that helps with the success of this book, and I'm so excited to share it with you when it comes out on March 3rd. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to my little Black as Diamond TED Talk. We're gonna jump to a quick word about today's sponsor, and then we'll get into the books. Oh, hey there, you gorgeously handsome human. Is this a good time to talk about today's sponsor? Today's video is sponsored by Allplay, the makers of board games, tables, and shelves. Whether you're a board game fanatic or just getting into the hobby, Allplay has something for everyone. They've got strategy games, games about goats, word games, two-player games, fishing games, witchy games, and more. They also make gorgeous yet affordable tables for any game night, and highly customizable shelves that let you choose which cube goes where. Shelves which are perfect, by the way, for both books and board games. All of their games are super accessible, easy to learn, and most importantly, fun. And if you're interested in learning more about Allplay's games, shelves, or tables, head to allplay.com at the link in my description. I guarantee doing so is going to make your game nights even better. So as you know, I do split up the books that I read every month, and especially when I do these wrap-ups, into different categories. And this month is a little more chaotic, which you'll kind of see because I did do a bunch of categories, but I did like one book from a bunch of different categories. But the first category I want to talk about is shelf control. So something that I'm doing in my short form content is something called Project Shelf Control, where I'm reading through every single book on my bookshelf. I'm going through all of them, and I'm reading the ones I haven't read yet, and then I'm deciding if I want to keep them or to unhaul them. So that's kind of the whole premise around this project, is trying to basically read through my physical TBR and hopefully get rid of some books. This month with my Project Shelf Control, I read two books as part of that, and one of them I unhauled and one of them I decided to keep. So the first one was A Crane Among Wolves. This is a historical fiction, romance story. It takes place in 16th century Korea, and we follow a young woman. Her sister has been kidnapped by a tyrannical king who is just like this awful guy. And along the way of trying to save her sister, she runs into the prince, who is maybe not so awful. And as you can see from them on the cover, they start to develop feelings or whatever. You know how these things go. Very enemies to lovers. I really wanted to like this a lot. And I think that a lot of you probably will. So the thing that I've compared this to a lot is the Apothecary Diaries, the manga. And I know a ton of people love that. Now, they are set in different places. They're set in different time periods, but they both have like very similar historical vibes. And reading them, there were a lot of points where, even though they are quite different, there were a lot of points where I could say like, oh, this really reminds me of this from that. And I also did not love Apothecary Diaries either. And I know a ton of people love that. So that's why I bring it up, because I think if you liked Apothecary Diaries, you will like this book. They're both historical. They both have this like kind of romantic aspect to them. This is much darker, for sure, than Apothecary Diaries. I will mention that. I had a really hard time caring about these characters. I think early on in the book, I was like settling in. I was like, surely at some point I'll start really caring about these people. And it never really hit. It never really hit a point where I was like, oh my gosh, I really care about what happens to them in the end. And unfortunately, because so much of the story is wrapped up in whether or not they are going to survive or get to safety or be together, this is a very character-driven story, okay, which normally I love. But when you don't care about the characters, a lot of the things that wrap a character-driven story together start to fall apart. And that, unfortunately, is what happened here with me. I just could not bring myself to really care or like love these two. And I wanted so badly to, but it just never really happened. There's like an interesting mystery plot within the book that I enjoyed. I really did like the way that the author built the world. I even liked the way that the author wrote the world and wrote all of this. I just didn't get into these two characters. And unfortunately, like the whole book kind of hinges on that. And instead, I found it to be very slow, very tedious to get through. And I will say towards the very end, this is like a romantic book. There's sort of this twist moment at the end where you don't know what happened to the prince. And they kind of play this moment of like last minute miscommunication. Miscommunication is my least favorite trope ever. And the fact that they tried to wheedle in some miscommunication in the final, 20 pages of this book, I was like, absolutely not. Even the miscommunication here just felt so unearned and so uninteresting to me. And it really felt like somebody said, hey, this book needs to be 20 to 30 pages longer. And this is what they came up with to stretch it out. It's like when you have to hit a word count, that's what these moments at the end of the book feel like to me. And it really just was the nail in the coffin for me. I was like, oh no, I really just do not like how this is shaping up in the end. So for me, this was not a win this month. I did not enjoy this book very much, but I say all of that to say that I think if you like stuff like the Apothecary Diaries specifically, if you like that historical with a little bit of romance, and you like kind of a darker edge to that type of story with a little bit of mystery, there is a little murder mystery element here, I think you'll like this. I don't think this is a book that not everyone will like. I say this a lot when we have these discussions about books, that I think there is a difference between a badly written, badly crafted book and a book that is just not for someone. And sometimes the two can be the same thing, but this to me is not a badly crafted book. It just is very much a book that was not for me. Everything about this book, it kind of falls into categories of things that I don't typically enjoy. So it's not really that surprising that I did enjoy it, but I do think there are a lot of people who will enjoy this for what it is, because I do think it is still crafted quite well. It just wasn't something that I personally enjoyed. So this was an unhaul, and I will be getting this book into the hands of someone who will enjoy it a lot more than me, which is always a great thing. So something kind of interesting, the two books that I read this month for Shelf Control, the very first one I read, A Crane Among Wolves, was actually the first book that I read in January. And the second book that I read for Shelf Control was one of the very last books that I read in January. So this is Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, and this is a really interesting book. I have so many things I want to share with you about this book. So the first thing I want to say is I really enjoyed this. And it is a book that the last chapter specifically makes the book. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to spoil it, but the ending of this book is out of this world good. And the last chapter truly makes this book, because there was a piece of criticism that I had throughout this entire book. And it was the thing keeping this book at a 4 out of 5 for me. And I'm not actually going to be sharing that criticism with you today, because it is completely undone by the last chapter of the book. So I'm not even going to tell you what that criticism is, because I think it would spoil the ending of this book for you. But this is a book where the last chapter sent that from a 4 to a 5. It is that amazing of an ending. It's so good. So the interesting thing to me about this book, there's a lot of interesting things, but when I finished reading this book, I was so enamored with the ending and with the book as a whole that I posted a picture of it on Threads and I said, wow, this book. And I immediately was met with people telling me to look into the author because apparently there was some controversy surrounding this author recently. I think the controversy happened on Threads, if not Threads, then Twitter. And I'm not going to speak very much on that controversy specifically because I just don't really understand all sides of it all that well. But I do bring it up for two reasons. One, you might want to look into that before you decide if you want to read this book or if you want to invest money in it or whatever that might be. Totally up to you. But I just wanted to make you aware that there is some things out there. But secondly, I actually think the fact that the author got into some controversy and has gotten into controversy in the past because of things that they've said online actually makes the book more interesting. And I'll tell you why in just a second. This book is the story of Zelu, and Zelu is a disabled main character, so she is in a wheelchair, and her life is kind of a mess, but also she is a character that is kind of hard to love. She is a very flawed, very human character to me, and I think that's why I ended up loving her so much, is that she's just so incredibly real to me. Just such a real person, such a real character. And she is dealing with like a lot. At the beginning of the book, she is a teacher. She ends up being fired because she kind of like snaps back at a student. Her family is of Nigerian descent, and her family is like a lot. Like her family is constantly criticizing her, constantly on her for different things, doesn't really think that she can like manage her own life. It's just really hypercritical. And she also just has a really hard time like connecting with other people. She's just going through this really hard time in her life. And what ends up happening is she ends up writing a book about robots. And she's like down on her luck, has like no money to her name, going through it, terrible, life is bad. And the book sells instantly, gets movie rights instantly. They buy it as a trilogy. The book like goes crazy. And suddenly, like overnight, she's famous because of this book. And then she gets thrust into the public eye, which is already so difficult just as a person. But she is also a person that is going through a lot and is just like not prepared for that level of like scrutiny and that level of attention. And so she has a really hard time dealing with that. Now, at the same time, she gets approached by someone who is doing medical studies to basically create these like special prosthetics that hook to someone's legs who is unable to walk and then makes them able to walk. And so she goes through the process of being able to use these prosthetic legs to make herself walk. And then, of course, is getting a lot of criticism from like the disabled community because they're like, you represented us. And now because you have all this money, you're basically throwing that back in our face. And so you're watching her like rise to fame and get these opportunities to do things that she decides she wants to do, and then other opportunities come along as well, but then watching her face like the really harsh criticism coming back at her for all of those things. And you watch her as a person just so frustrated by being constantly misunderstood, by having people constantly tell her what she should or should not do, who she should and should not be, where she should and should not go. And it's kind of interesting to see a lot of these things from the author's point of view, because, you know, we always talk online, there are like these unspoken rules, right? Like authors shouldn't go into review spaces, right? Is a good one that's come up a lot recently. But you see people coming into her space constantly like driving her crazy. Like she's on a plane in first class sleeping and someone wakes her up to get an autograph on their book. Someone like comes through and like nobody's around to help her. And the book talks a lot about because she is disabled, it's not easy for her to like get out of these situations easily. And so she's constantly being like harassed by people. And it's hard because these people are fans. They love what she does, but she's not like really a people person. She wants to kind of be left alone. And then it takes her a while to get her next book out, and people are like really, like anytime she posts anything on the internet, people are like, we don't care, shut up and go write. And so you kind of see it from both sides. You see this author that is just like so sick of everyone telling her who she is and what she is and how she is, and watching her kind of start to lash out and like push back on people. And so I bring that up because it's interesting that this book deals with that, and also that this author has found themselves in a little bit of hot water on the internet for things that they have said or done, and then not maybe handled it in what people would consider the correct or professional way. That is not me taking a side in all of that in any way, shape, or form. However, I think it's really interesting that the book addresses that and it's also happened to this person in real life. The book also has several chapters where we get to actually see the robot storyline that she's writing. You get to actually see that story too, which is really interesting. You get to see kind of how it mirrors her own story and things that are happening to her in her life. At one point, the book gets made into a movie and they just like completely gut it of all the culture. She puts a lot of Nigerian culture into the book, and that just gets like completely ripped away from the film, and you can see her anger about that. It's such a complex book. It's so interesting to me. When I started reading it, I read like the first 3 chapters, and like I said, Zelu was very prickly, very hard character to love. And at first I was like, I don't know. I truly thought this was going to be a DNF for me. I was like, I don't know if I'm in the mood to read this. I don't know if I'm really like vibing with the story this is telling. But at some point, really early on, this book got its hooks into me. I just read it like voraciously. Like I couldn't put it down. I really, really, really loved this. And like I said, I think the ending is just like chef's kiss perfection. I will say, if you don't like super complex, sometimes highly unlikable characters, you might not love this book, but I loved it for the complexity and the nuance and the humanity and the fact that we're following a character who is dealing with a lot of bad things, and her reaction to a lot of it is just anger. Like she's angry and she's upset and she's furious, and I liked seeing that. I think a lot of times we see characters who are dealing with like really harsh criticisms from their family, and they're supposed to press back on that with like joy or positivity, or, you know, just staying focused on the good stuff. And I kind of liked seeing a character who didn't necessarily always focus on the good. It just felt so much more real to me. I loved this. I thought it was really excellent. And I think the real world tie-in of knowing a little bit more, it almost feels like the author maybe put some of themselves into this book. I don't want to speak for them because I don't know them personally or anything, but I found that it kind of added to the lore of this story for me a little bit. If you're interested in picking it up, I would look into that as well, because I know, you know, sometimes people are a little bit more concerned about who they spend their money with and who they're purchasing books from, but you can also like try it out from your library. And like I said, I'm not telling you one way or another, but it is something worth looking into if you're interested in checking out this book. But just from a purely book standpoint, I really liked this a lot. And this is going to be a keep for me. I will not be unhauling with this because this was just such an incredible reading experience. It's such a cool book. It's so incredibly unique. I can't even tell you what I would compare it to because it feels very much its own thing in a really special way. So yeah, Death of the Author. I liked this a lot. All right, next up is The Last Ember by Lily Berlin Dodd. This is the first book in the Arimander Chronicles. It is a middle grade book. First book just came out, so the rest of the series is not out yet. This was our book club book this month. I mentioned at the beginning about Easy Cat Press. That is also how you join my book club. So my book club is free to join. You have to be an Easy Cat Press member, and then we hold it through Discord. I thought this was just okay. So this is following kind of 2 characters kind of intertwining as one of them basically gets their hands on an Arimander egg, which is like kind of a dragon egg. And the other character is he's like on a mission to get it. And then they kind of like run into each other and then end up having to work together. Kind of has like series of unfortunate event vibes a little bit. When I was reading it, it reminded me a lot of like maybe a more middle grade Discworld a little bit because all of the characters are so interesting and quirky and kind of silly in their own way. A couple things stand out to me about this book. For one, I don't think any middle grade book I read after finishing Skandar was going to have to live up to the incredible heights of that book. And this book, unfortunately, did not hit that for me. I found that this book was weirdly fast paced and at the same time felt kind of slow to get through. There were times in this book where I was just like, okay, let's move it along. Like nothing's really happening here. Let's move it along. And that's never a feeling you want to have, especially with a book that's not that long, especially with a middle grade book. Like middle grade books should be like pretty fast paced. I also kind of curious the whole time I read this. I like could not figure out who exactly this was for because it is marketed as middle grade, but there are moments that feel very childish, very young reader. And then there are moments that feel like very like young adults and quite older than I would usually think the audience for this would be. So I think if you are going to recommend this to a young person, I would say probably older middle grade, younger high school would be a good match for this because there's some like pretty dark, serious, scary moments in this book, especially like adults doing really mean things to kids. And so just be aware of that. I guess I would also liken it to something like Matilda, which is also middle grade. And there's a lot of adults doing bad things to kids in those. But in this book specifically, I like really noticed it. And I was like, oh, these adults are like, the author even makes a point at one point in the book to talk about the villain of the book and say like, they're a bad person. They are not going to be redeemed. They're a terrible person. And they are. Like you see them do terrible things to these kids throughout the book. The other thing this book is guilty of is that it is the first book in a series, and yet it kind of feels like a prequel or like a prologue, because I feel like this book does a lot of setting things up, a lot of setting up exciting moments, and then not delivering on them because we kind of get promised that we'll see them in the future. I feel like this book does a lot of setting up characters, setting up moments, setting up the world, but then it ends before we get any of the real payoff of that. And I don't love that either. I've said it a million times when I talk about books. I need the first book of a series to give me its all. Give me a beginning, a middle, and an end. Set things up. Give me payoff. Give me the full picture of what you're doing in this world. And then you can build off of that in future books, right? But a first book that has like a pretty like big cliffhanger and kind of leaves the payoff of a lot of things until future books, you're not going to get a lot of buy-in from me because you haven't shown me that you can give me payoff and you haven't shown me that you can give me an ending. And I am usually not willing to trust an author past a book one if they can't show me that they can do those techniques in the first book. Every once in a while I'll make an exception to that rule. It does happen from time to time, but for this, I don't know. I would have to hear that the second book was incredible for me to pick it up, because even when I finished this, I was like, And I will say I read this pretty early in the month, and even now I have a hard time recalling any like important details of the story for you because there just wasn't that much that was memorable about it. Just really nothing about this really stuck out to me. In a sea of incredible middle grade books, I don't think this does enough to like set itself apart from the pack. Last Ember was just okay for me. I did not love it. I'm curious if you guys read it for the book club or if you've read it before, what are your thoughts? But for me, this one just didn't hit the mark as much as I was wanting it to. And I think part of that too is because I loved Skandar last month so much that I was hoping this would be like, okay, I'm coming off of Skandar, I want to read something else just as great. And this definitely just was not, which, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of sad. So, oh well. All right, so getting into our next section of discussion would be the history of science fiction, which is another project I'm currently doing. I just posted a short about this one, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. It's the first thing I've ever read by H.G. Wells. And I gotta say, I quite enjoyed this book. You probably already know the story. This is about a time traveler. And he basically comes back from the future and then goes and tells his weekly dinner guests about like what he was doing there. And while he was there, he meets a couple of different types of people. He sees a world that is completely different from ours. And basically kind of the idea for him is that the world hit this point where everything was automated. They'd corrected all the problems that there were. There were no longer challenges for humankind. And because there were no longer challenges, humankind kind of diminishes, basically. So when he first gets there, he meets this group of people called the Eloi, who are very meek, fragile, doll-like people. And also they sometimes go missing at night, which eventually he finds out is because there's another group of creatures called the Morlocks, which are these like ape-like people, and they are basically raising the Eloi as cattle and eating them. So that's disgusting. I think as this story progresses, he also loses his time machine, has to get it back from the Morlocks. And then eventually, once he does, he goes even further into the future, and we sort of watch with him as the world, the earth, and even the sun burns out. So the earth dies, the sun burns out until we get to like eventual just like quiet, just silence. And I liked that ending piece of the book the most. That was my favorite part of the book. The part with the Eloi and the Morlocks was fine. I mean, it was interesting enough, but that part where he's like going further and further into the future and watching the end of everything, really beautiful, really poetic, really haunting. And I really loved that aspect of the book. I think the reason that the Eloi and Morlock part just didn't work that much for me is because I found it really frustrating that this guy had the ability and the intelligence to build a whole time machine, and yet he is completely unprepared for anything that he might find in the future other than like a thriving society. Like he is basically planning to go into the future and just find a thriving metropolis where they welcome him with open arms. And when he gets there, he's like, everything is different. Like he's not prepared for anything. Of course they steal his time machine. He doesn't do anything to protect it. At one point, he doesn't even bring like matches. He goes into a dark place and doesn't even bring anything to help with the light. And he's like, oh, I should have brought something. Yeah, you should have brought something. Like, it's crazy that he's such an intelligent scientist, but has like zero survival skills. And that like drove me crazy because it just like is continuous. There are multiple points where I'm like, why aren't you prepared for this? Like, you're a scientist. You're not dumb. Like, you are an intelligent person who made a time machine. You should be a little bit more prepared in your adventure. And that kind of drove me a little bit crazy. I enjoyed this a lot. It's a short story. You read it pretty quickly. I found it very interesting. I found it to be a very interesting look at a very interesting early time travel book, but it's also a very interesting early like Dead Earth sci-fi type of book. I found it really interesting. I've since reading it learned some things about H.G. Wells because I've done a little bit more research on the author now that I really don't like. Like if this guy was still alive, I would not be reading his books. He seems like kind of not a great person, but I found his take on sci-fi, like I said, this is the first H.G. Wells I've ever read, to be really engaging and really interesting. And I liked the way this book was written. Now I'm not surprised to say this now that I've learned a little bit more, but there definitely is some language in the book, especially speaking about just anybody that's not white that has not aged very well, as there is with many of these books. Obviously, it's a product of its time, but it's something I feel like is worth mentioning, especially learning a little bit more about H.G. Wells as I have. So keep that in mind. But I did enjoy this for the classic sci-fi time traveling story that it was. Yeah. The other history of sci-fi book that I read is called We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. I don't even know if I can properly discuss this book. There's so much happening in this book, but this is like a dystopian sci-fi novel. This is sort of like early dystopian, and we follow these characters who literally don't have names. In this future, everybody is just identified by like a serial code kind of number, basically, and they're living in this society that's like all made of glass, basically, so you can never do anything in private. Every part of your day is pre-planned, even who you have like physical relations with. You have to like fill out a form to have like physical relations with a person. It's very like by the book, no romance, no emotion. And within that world, our main character basically meets someone who is like kind of part of the revolution. Like, oh, we're going to fight back against this. We're going to take back our emotions. We're going to take back feeling and things like that. And of course, the central hub system is like, no, you're not. And so it definitely has a lot of the things that you would expect from a dystopian novel. It's a very, very interesting read, especially because these people are humans in the future, but they read very robot-like, very robotic, very no feelings. And as you go, you start to see them try and like kind of grapple with like suddenly feeling emotions, which is like really hard for them. And so I found all of that to be really, really interesting. This novel was originally written in Russian, and I don't know if this is a product of the translation, but I did find the prose and the writing of this book to be very, very, very dry. And I think it could be a couple things. It could be obviously from the perspective of this, how the story is told. So this story is told through like journal entries by the main character. So as a person who is like not really feeling emotions, I guess it makes sense that they are writing in that way. I think it also could be like translation a little bit. I think it's kind of both of those things. So the book, though it is interesting and presents a lot of interesting concepts, and it's a very short book, I found it kind of hard to like sift my way through it. I think also because it's just so bleak. It's such a miserable future. And let me just tell you, if you are looking for a hopeful, like, we can fight back and we can survive dystopia and our evil overlords, this is not the book to look for. This is not the book where you're going to find hope or joy or a plan to survive this dystopian future or present that we're currently living in. This is a very hopeless, bleak, dark look at that dystopian future. The ending kind of gutted me a little bit because I kind of didn't expect it to go the direction that it goes. And then when it did, I was like, ooh, like this is a book you finish and you're kind of like, oh, I need a shower. Like I'm upset. I didn't necessarily enjoy reading this book because it's just not an enjoyable book to read. It's a harsh read. I think that's a good word for it. However, I am glad I read it. I think you can see a lot of the things that eventually turn their way into the more and more dystopian novels that we see in the future, especially like dystopian sci-fi specifically. I think it presents a really interesting look at our future. I also have to mention this book was published in 1924, and it's really interesting that this author's biggest worries about a dystopian future in 1924 have not, in the past 100 years, have not changed much from our biggest worries for a dystopian future. And I found that to be really interesting too. I think this book is still very engaging and still very relevant by today's standards, which was another reason that I am glad that I read it. And honestly, maybe another reason that it was very bleak and haunting for me to read, because I was like, wow, we are still here. We are still fighting the same thing. We are still scared of this same thing. And in many ways, with the rise of AI and things like that and other things that are happening in the world right now, I feel like we are closer than ever before to the future that this book is like essentially warning us of, which was very, like I said, not a fun time, very sad, very upsetting, very bleak, very harsh. So if you're in the mood for something like that, a little bit more of a brain burner, a little bit of a twisty book, a little bit of a book that is not happy, and something like early dystopian, I think this is definitely worth the read. It's very short, like I said. But if you're looking for some hope in these trying times, I would not read We. I would save it for another day because you are not going to find any hope for the future in this book. I'm actually going to talk very, 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 very little about this one. This is The Flame and the Flower by Kathleen E. Woodwiss. The reason I'm going to talk so little about it is that this is the book that I read for our romance book podcast, The Panelists. We'll be recording this episode, I think, first week of February. So I'm going to save a lot of my discussion and a lot of my thoughts and feelings about this book for that. This is considered to be the first bodice ripper. It is a wild book. Every trope that you can think of in romance, the good, the bad, and the ugly, okay? The good tropes that you love, the bad tropes that you hate, the middle tropes, all of it is in this book. Like, this book is a wild, drama-filled ride. And I'm still processing a little bit. I was going to leave it off completely because we're going to talk about it in the podcast. I kind of want to save the discussion for that. But I wanted to at least acknowledge that I read it this month. I think I liked it. It is a crazy book. There is a lot happening. And I don't like all of the things that happen to the main character in the book because she goes through a lot of awful things. But I liked the characters, and I think I liked the story. As someone new to romance, if I read this as my first romance book, I think I'd be like, no, I'm good. I don't know that I can handle all of this. This seems, I think I'm lost. That is a little bit how I felt reading this book. I was like, I need an adult. Can someone find me an adult? But there was no point where I didn't enjoy reading. I think the only major criticism I have, other than the fact that there are some heavy trigger warnings in this book that I would say, and going through some of that with the characters was really challenging. The other criticism I would say is this is a very overwritten book. This book is way longer than it needs to be. I would look back at the last 100 pages and I'd be like, what really happened? What have we really accomplished in these 100 pages? And it is all engaging. I was really engaged. I was never bored, which is interesting, but I do think the book is just maybe twice as long. I think you could tell the exact same story in half the time. So that would be my one big complaint about this. But like I said, I don't want to get too into this one. We'll be discussing it fully and at length in every way, shape, and form on the next episode of the Panelist podcast. I just wanted to acknowledge that I did, in fact, read it this month. All right, as many of you already know, this past month, I jumped back into Discworld, finally. I started on a quest to read all of them, I think back in 2022 or 2023, and I got about halfway through, and then I just was like, I need a break. I think with Discworld, and I feel this way about Redwall as well, I think they are books that are fun to read. They both are long series that you can kind of read in any order, but they do all kind of follow a pattern and a formula. And I think after you read so many, for me, I have to take a break because they start to feel a little repetitive. And that's kind of where I was at with Discworld when I stopped reading them before. I was like, I feel like I'm reading the same book over and over again. I need a little bit of a break. And so I finally decided to come back to it because I do really want to finish this entire series. And the one that I came back with was The Last Continent by Terry Pratchett, of course. I wish that I had stopped my read through these. I'm reading them in chronological order, and I wish I'd stopped my read through of these at a different point because this was not the best book to come back to it with. I think when you stop a long series and you come back to it, the hope is that the one you come back to it will reinvigorate you and re-excite you about the series. And The Last Continent did not do that for me. I'm still planning to continue reading them. When I show you my February plan, you're going to see that one of them is on there. I'm going to continue trying to read one a month, but this book, first of all, it focuses on Rincewind. So if you've never read Discworld before, it all takes place on the same disc world, but different stories follow different kind of main characters. There's several different main characters, main groups of characters. And Rincewind is a wizard, and he oftentimes is accompanied by other wizards that work at the wizard college. And he is one of the central main characters. The other ones are Death is a central main character. There are witches that are central main characters. One of the main ones, her name is Granny Weatherwax. And these characters do sort of intersect into each other. It's kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe a little bit. Is there's an Iron Man film, and then there's a Captain America film, and then eventually they all come together for something, right? And that is kind of how these books work as well. I don't think there's really an Avengers moment. There's not really a moment where they all come together. They all just kind of fluctuate in and out of each other's stories, which is kind of interesting. But this one follows Rincewind. In the previous book, he was basically portaled to a continent called 4X, which is basically this world's version of Australia. And in this book, there's a librarian in this world who's an orangutan. And I know, amazing. And he's one of my favorite characters. And he gets sick. And so every time he sneezes, he turns himself into a different object. So the wizards back at the college decide, well, we're going to try and use magic to fix him. But in order to use magic on someone, you have to know their real name. And they don't know his real name. They think the only person who knows his real name is Rincewind the wizard. So they are going to go and try and find Rincewind on 4X, Australia. And in trying to find Rincewind, they end up going through a portal that takes them way back in time, like beginning of time, where they meet the god of evolution. Okay, this story is wild. In present day, Rincewind is traveling around 4X and trying to survive, because that's typically what Rincewind does, is he just is like trying to survive and whining about it the whole time. So 4X has been going through an eons long drought, and he meets a magical kangaroo who tells him that he is like the chosen one who's going to bring back the rains. And that's kind of what the story is about here. I think for me, I don't love Rincewind. So that's like number one problem here. I don't love Rincewind. Oftentimes he is a character that the plot happens to, and he is not affecting the plot. So I prefer characters that are kind of like driving their stories forward. Rincewind is a character that is kind of like existing despite everything happening around him, and he complains about it the entire time. And I think it's funny at first, but because there's so many books that focus on Rincewind, that type of humor starts to wear on me. I also just feel like a lot of this book exists just to make jokes about Australia, which is fine. They're not like mean jokes. They're all like pretty tasteful. They're funny, but I didn't need a whole book for that. Speaking of jokes, the big thing I came away from this book feeling is that I actually found this book to be really funny. Like some of the jokes, there were whole scenes that I was like laughing out loud. It is a very funny book. Some of the jokes are just so good in this book. I wish the plot was good enough to support those jokes, though. The plot of this book is just not that interesting. I know when I said everything just now, you were like, probably like, whoa, that sounds crazy. But compared to other Discworld books, this plot actually wasn't that engaging to me compared to other Discworld books. And I would find myself in these moments when characters were having discussions where they were like, joke, 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 joke. I really was enjoying the book because I found it so funny. But then when like actual plot points were happening, I just didn't care, because I just didn't think the actual plot of the book was good enough or interesting enough to hold up the pillars of these jokes and the silliness of it all. And so for me, this book was very just okay. I'm still very excited to jump back into Discworld. It was by far not my least favorite book I've read in Discworld, but it was nowhere near my favorite either. This one was like right middle of the pack. It was okay. If you're looking to try out Discworld and see if you would enjoy it, this is not the book I'd recommend for that. It was just okay. It was like some of the better jokes of the series, but then the plot is like one of the worst of the series, I thought. And all of that kind of just brings it right to the middle point. So yeah, one of my big goals in 2026 is to try and read a nonfiction book every single month. I kind of started doing this back in 2024, early 2025, and sort of fell off. So I'm trying to get back onto that. So this month I read The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Broussard. I don't know how to say his last name. And this is, as the name implies, it is a story about the rise and the fall of the dinosaurs. Now, I was a dinosaur kid growing up. I was so obsessed with dinosaurs. I wanted to be a paleontologist. And so reading this, for me, even though there's like a lot of great information here and a lot of really interesting science here, this book also felt really nostalgic to me. It took me back to a time when I was a kid and was just so obsessed with dinosaurs, and I loved that. I think the overall science of this book, even when it gets really detailed, I think it's still pretty on the light side. Like, this is meant to be a book that like anybody can pick up and enjoy. So it never really gets super deep into the science, though it does really start to talk about some really interesting things. I love, there were discussions about like how scientists come to the conclusions they come to about dinosaurs, how they discover new dinosaurs. How did scientists come to the realization that a bunch of dinosaurs had feathers, for example? How do scientists determine how heavy a dinosaur would have been? What was it like when they first like were discovering like Tyrannosaurus Rex? Like, it discusses a lot of that. So what you might be hearing here too is that not only is this book discussing like the actual life cycle of the dinosaurs themselves as a species, it's also discussing the scientists a lot, and the scientists who have made a lot of these discoveries, and the scientists who currently are working in the field to make more discoveries and push the science of dinosaurs forward. And to me, I'm going to be honest, I loved all the stuff where they were talking about dinosaurs and going into detail about Tyrannosaurus Rex and about the extinction, about the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic period, and on how did dinosaurs come to be? How did they get feathers? All of that is really interesting and great. But my favorite parts of this book was when it was talking about the human stories of the people who are making these discoveries. I found myself really engaged in those parts of the book and getting to know these people, and because they just sound like such an interesting cast of characters, even though they're real people, and seeing how they come to different conclusions and how they work together, and how sometimes there's some conflict between different scientists of like how they want to do things, or maybe they're competing to try and discover things the fastest, and all of that human side of it actually ended up being my favorite thing about this book. because the dinosaur science part of it, I think you could get a lot of that same information and probably even more detailed and more fully explored information from like a textbook. So the dinosaur information, and it reads like somebody who loves dinosaurs. Like if you sit down at a dinner table with someone who loves dinosaurs and you bring up dinosaurs and then they're like, well, you know what I love about dinosaurs? It kind of reads like that, but from someone who actually like knows what they're talking about. So a lot of times when he was talking about dinosaurs, it was just like spewing information of just like, and this happened, and this happened, and then this dinosaur. And it's fun and it's interesting. And I learned quite a bit from it. But the moments where I really was like, oh, I really enjoying reading this are when he was talking about the actual scientists behind the scenes of making all of those discoveries. That is the part of this book that I really enjoyed a lot. I liked this a lot. It's not like groundbreaking nonfiction. I found it to be a very easy read as far as nonfiction goes, but it was fun. And I think it's important to remember that I think people think of nonfiction as like boring or dry or about like really deep or upsetting things, which yes, there's a lot of nonfiction that is excellent, that is about the horrible things that happen in the world. And I've talked about many of those on my page as well in the past. And I think those are important to read as well. Like there's so much nonfiction you can read to learn about the horrors of the world. And I think a lot of it is very important reading that is worth reading to learn what's going on and be informed. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that nonfiction can also just be really fun. And this was a really fun, engaging, enjoyable nonfiction read. So yeah, I liked this quite a bit and I had a great time reading it. And it really filled my inner child spirit of a little kid who loved dinosaurs. I like to think that a young me would have loved this book. So I tried to love it as fully as I could for that younger version of me. All right, another series that I'm currently doing on my pages is that I am trying to read a bunch of Star Wars books. And so one thing I'm working towards is I'm trying to get to this point in the Legends series of Star Wars books. So not the new Disney canon, but the Legends series where Luke Skywalker basically starts like the new Jedi Order, okay? And it's like a whole series of books. So I'm trying to like work my way through the backlog of things that eventually lead to that point. And one of those is the X-Wing books. There's many more books in the like Rogue Squadron X-Wing series, but the first 4 are their own kind of like encapsulated series, and some of their characters go on to be important in that new Jedi Order story that happens. These are the final 2 in that first 4-book series. The first one was the Krytos Trap, which is book 3, and then the last one is the Back to War, which is book 4. Okay, so I read both of these this month. Again, one at the beginning of the month, one at the end of the month. The Krytos Trap I love. In these 4 books, we are seeing the rebellion like post episode 6, post Emperor Palpatine is dead, Darth Vader dead. The rebellion has really made some big strides. And within these books, we actually get to see them kind of retake Coruscant, the big planet that is also a city, like the city planet from the movies. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I try to make it so that even if you don't know Star Wars, you can follow along. Okay, so I hope you appreciate that. So we get to see the rebels take back that planet from the Empire. And that's really cool. So that kind of happens at the end of book 2. In book 3, we find out that this evil woman who's like kind of running things for the Empire a little bit, she has basically left the planet with a virus that is now killing people. And the rebellion is trying to basically like keep people alive because it's like creating a lot of unrest. And as part of that, if you've seen episode 5 and you remember that Luke goes out in the snow and then he almost doesn't make it back alive. And then when he does get back, he's in that like water looking tank thing. So that is a Bacta tank. Bacta is like this miracle cure thing that can like heal people of ailments. And as you might imagine, this wonderful miracle cure is a very important resource to people in this galaxy. So they eventually are now at war trying to get enough Bacta to be able to cure the people of this awful disease. And I really enjoyed this series of books as a whole. They're dealing with a lot of the politics. I think the movies, especially the original trilogy, really sets it up as like a pretty simple like rebellion versus empire. But these are really going into the details behind how the empire was running and keeping people in line and how the rebellion is running and how the rebellion has to then go from being a rebellion to being a government. And that is kind of challenging to like take this rebel idea and then try to actually build a working government from it. And so the books are dealing with that. They're dealing with this like awful disease. In book 3, we see one of the main characters is like in a prison. So we have this like prison escape situation. Book 3 also has this like really interesting courtroom drama element. I made this comment in my short video when I talked about the Krytos trap, but I always think it's funny now that I'm reading these Legends books, which came out long before Disney ever took over or the new trilogy. And a lot of people watch new Star Wars and they say, oh, Disney ruined Star Wars. They introduced all these politics and they made it woke and they added more diversity and blah, 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 blah. And I'm here to tell you that those people are wrong. There is so much diversity. There's so much discussion about diversity and the importance of diversity and the importance of equity and inclusion. There's discussion about certain races and how they use pronouns specifically. And there's discussion about like correct pronouns for certain people in these books before Disney. I know it's crazy. I know a lot of people don't realize this, but pronouns as a part of speech actually existed before Disney. You might not know that. I mean, if you went to an English class, even one English class ever in your life, you probably know that. But otherwise, you might not know that. These books are discussing those things. They're discussing fighting against these empirical fascist regimes. They're discussing all of these things that people try to act like Star Wars didn't have pre-Disney takeover. And so I found that probably the most interesting thing about these books is that they really are going fully into the political side. From that same lens, what I think is interesting is that these 4 books, they have to have been part of the inspiration for Andor because there are full-on characters, story moments, aspects of the politics that feel like Andor ripped them straight out of these books. So if you like Andor and you like that more political side of the Star Wars canon, I think you would really like this series of books. Now, I will say I loved the Krytos trap, easily my favorite of the 4 books. I thought the Back to War was my least favorite of the 4 books. I felt almost unnecessary. It never reaches the heights of book 3. It feels almost a little bit like an afterthought. It kind of feels like it's tying up a lot of the loose ends from book 3 and sort of finding like good ending places for the characters before we go into whatever the next thing is. It just doesn't feel 90% of what is happening in the book, I didn't really care about, unfortunately. I just was like, ah. And that was really unfortunate because I thought book 3, the Krytos trap, was so good. But the Back to War, for me, was kind of a miss. I almost feel like I could have not read it and been okay, which is never like a great feeling with the last book in a series. And I know there's another like X-Wing, like Wraith Squadron or something that comes after this, but this is Back to War is technically the end of these 4 books, right? Honestly, I don't think I even needed to read it. That is how much I was like, about it. I want to mention one last thing about these books and about all Star Wars books that might be helpful to you. I don't know. Something that's really cool is I end up using audiobooks a lot to read some of these books. And I really like the Star Wars audiobooks because they have like sound effects and music and space battles. But for some reason, these X-Wing books, they do too much. They have so many background sounds and so much noise that every time I would listen to them as audiobooks, I would get a headache because there's a lot of like in space noises. We are on a ship in space. So there's like this like low hum in the background, like, and then there's like screeching noise where it's like that loud beeping that you hear in your house that you're like, what is that? Can somebody make that stop? There would be whole chapters, like 20-minute long chapters that had that screeching noise in the back. And it was constant. Like there was never a moment of quiet. I've done other Star Wars audiobooks where that wasn't a problem. But in this book specifically, there was always some sort of nagging, awful noise in the background. So just be aware of that if you want to try and do these as audiobooks. I really disliked the audiobooks for these. The reader was great. The narration and the voices, all of that great. But there just is so much background noise. It truly was difficult to get through reading these as audiobooks because of that, because it just gave me like the worst headaches because the noises were constant. So I want to throw that out there that a lot of times I'm always like, oh, get it however you want to read it. Read it in the physical, read it on a Kindle, read it on an audiobook, whatever makes you happy. I don't recommend these specific Star Wars books as audiobooks. Other Star Wars books, sure, but these were noisy and obnoxious and they made me sad and they gave me headaches. So I just wanted to mention that before we move on. The further we get into this video, the more chaotic my reading for the month is going to get. I just want to warn you of that. So I read the first book in the Underland Chronicles. This is Gregor the Overlander. This is by Suzanne Collins, who you might recognize that name because she wrote a little series that a few people have read, not a big deal, called The Hunger Games. And in this story, we follow a young man and his toddler sister named Boots, and they go into into this underworld that is filled with like talking bats and cockroaches, and everything is like bigger, so they can like ride the cockroaches around, and spiders and bats, and it's like this underworld, and there's like a whole civilization of people there, and they kind of fall into it and then have to try and like find their way home. And I decided to read the first one because I did a video somewhat recently where I talked about some books, that a book specifically that reminded me of Hollow Knight, which is a video game that I played this past year that I loved. And this book specifically kept coming up where people were like, oh, if you like Hollow Knight, you should check out Gregor the Overlander. So I was like, oh, I'm going to give it a try. It's fine. I think I get why people recommend it, right? Because you have like big bugs, you have this underworld area, but it doesn't necessarily have like the darkness or like the creepy, kind of scary, haunting vibe of Hollow Knight. It kind of just has the like overall aesthetic of the world a little bit. It also is middle grade, so it's like a little bit more cheery and silly and goofy, whatever. I think what I've come to realize, and this book really nailed this home for me. So over the past few years, I've kind of come to realize that I am just not that big of a fan of Suzanne Collins as a writer. Listen, no hate to people who love Hunger Games and love those series, and nothing wrong about it. But I have found that I am just not a big fan of how she writes books. And that's okay. She doesn't need every single person on the face of the planet to be a fan of how she writes books. It's okay if somebody's like, not for me, right? Again, no hate to her. No hate to her books. No ill will here. Every time I read one of her books, I'm always like, they just don't really work for me. For a long time, the only thing I'd really read of hers was the Hunger Games stuff. And then in my head, I was like, well, maybe I just don't like competition books, which is another thing. I'm not a big fan of competition books like the Hunger Games. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not a fan of that. Or maybe I'm not a fan of this like style of story. Or maybe I just don't like these characters. And it was most apparent when I started reading this. I was like, oh yeah, it's definitely her writing. Like, I'm just not a big fan of how she writes books. The way she writes, it's very direct. I like very poetic, flowery prose, lyrical. Like when you read the back of a book and it's like, the prose were lyrical, I'm like, oh, sign me up. And Suzanne Collins is not that type of writer. Her writing is very direct and to the point, and very like, it has like that kind of cadence to it. And I think a lot of people like that because it's very like no nonsense, to the point. And that type of writing also typically creates a pretty fast pace because you're not getting stuck in the paragraphs long explanation of the colors on the wallpaper, things like that. And I found that it's so direct and it doesn't have as much like lyricalness or poetry to it or whatever you want to call it. Because it doesn't have that, I have a hard time like really getting into it because it feels like I'm listening to a list of like bullet points of like what someone did. It's like listening to someone tell you how their day went. Well, I went out and then I went to the grocery store and then I went to the mall and then I picked up this. And that is truly what her writing sounds like in my head, is very like point, 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 point. And it's just not a style of writing I really enjoy all that much. And that really became apparent to me as I was reading this book, because I was like, this isn't a bad story. These characters are interesting. This world is interesting. I just don't really love how it's written. So this was like very kind of meh for me. I think I was much more excited for this book, and I think that didn't help either. Like I looked at this cover, I read what the book was about, and I was like, this seems very much up my alley, and I've been really enjoying middle grade stuff lately, and it's a 5-book series. Maybe this is my next Skandar. Maybe I need to stop thinking that things are the next Skandar. Maybe that's not helping anything. But yeah, I read this and I got to the end and I was like, if I don't ever find out what happens to these characters after this, it'd be okay. I don't really need to know anymore. I know everything I need to know about this world and these characters, and I'm okay not continuing their story with them. And that's all right. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I gave it a chance at least. Whoa, there's a cover you haven't seen since the old Scholastic Book Fair. I've been talking about this for a while. This is not coming out of the blue. I've been talking about wanting to read Animorphs for a hot minute now. I think maybe even for like the last year, I've been saying, I'm going to read all the Animorphs books. Just you wait. And this month I started. I think I read this book when I was a kid. Who remembers? I know for a fact I've seen this cover a billion times. It's haunting. How could you forget it? It's a little bit terrifying. I was trying to wait. Okay, so they're starting to reprint the books in like, I think it's like in April or May or something, with new covers that look a lot better. And I was like, I'm just going to wait for the new covers. And I was like, I'm tired of waiting. I want to read them now. So I started and I read the first book, The Invasion, and I have to tell you, I liked this quite a bit. I was like kind of shell-shocked by how much I liked this. So this is about this like group of 5 kids who comes upon like an alien has crash landed, and he's like, oh, I'm actually being attacked by these other aliens that they're already here on your planet, and they're like little wormies that go into people's head and control them, and they're trying to control the whole planet, and they're coming after me, but before they get here, I'm going to give you this magical power, or scientific power, that lets you transform into animals. So they get this power, and then they start to try and like learn how to use this power to basically be able to like infiltrate and find out how to take down this like evil alien group that is like overtaking the planet, which of course they're going to have a hard time doing because they're kids, and this whole alien operation is like been going on for a long time, and they kind of know what they're doing, and they've got people everywhere that are like spies watching you. I thought this was a lot of fun, like a really great start to a sci-fi story. Reading this book felt like the first episode of a really good anime. And I actually just started book 2, and it really feels like each book is going to feel kind of like episodic in that way because they're so short. The entire time I'm reading it, I'm like, this should be an anime. Like, this feels like a really fun anime. Like, I want to watch this as an anime. And I like the characters. They have a very 90s like Power Rangers vibe. But like I said, I started book 2 today, and I can't help but notice that I think what I like about this too is it a little bit reminds me of the original Digimon. And growing up, I mean, I know everybody was like into Pokemon, and I love Pokemon too, but Digimon was my jam. Often people ask, when did you fall in love with stories, or when did you learn that you loved stories or books or whatever? And honestly, I know Digimon is not a book, it was a show, but that was the first show that I really remember caring about the characters and their stories and their families. And each of them had like a different family life, and some of them had divorced parents, and some of them had one parent. Each of them was going through something different, alongside the fact that they were trying to raise these digital monsters to try and save the digital world, okay? And this book and the way that it is told about these characters, and then them slowly getting these different powers to be able to turn into these things and kind of fighting against this like bigger thing while no one around them, their parents, nobody knows what's going on. It's just them. They're all in it together. And there's like twists and turns and things like that. Really reminds me of Digimon. And it's interesting that I never really read these as a kid, but yet reading them, because they remind me so much of Digimon, still feels very nostalgic. So yeah, I've only read the first one so far. I really like them. I think I'm going to continue reading them. I started book 2 today. I'm already like really into it. They're all so short. I can really read one of them in like a day, maybe a day and a half. Like, they're very quick reads. So I'm excited to read more of these and kind of discuss my journey through them. There's a lot of them. There's over 50 books, so it might take a hot minute to get through them. But I like them so far. I think they're really fun, and they're just fun, short reads. They're a little on the dark side. I think they're supposed to be middle grade, but to me, they kind of feel a little bit more YA because they do get a little dark. And I've had some people in my comments tell me that the story does get pretty dark, which of course I'm fine with. I think that's fun and interesting. And I like a story where the tension gets and the stakes get more and more intense as you read along. So I'm excited to continue this journey. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was like one of my big surprises this month. I thought it was really good. No one will understand how much I love this cover. It's so delightfully 80s. I just adore it. It's so, I mean, it's like 80s dark fantasy to a T. I love it. So here's how we got here. How did we get here? Let me tell you. This past month, I started playing Baldur's Gate 3. I have never really been a big Dungeons & Dragons fan. I talked about this in a video recently, but the couple of times that I've played Dungeons & Dragons, every single time I've played it with different groups has been miserable. It's been a terrible experience. I've been in a group where a DM like yelled at one of the players for trying to do like a fun thing, like with a rope that they had, where they were like, I'm going to try and swing in to like hit this guy. The DM was like, can you stop being ridiculous and just hit the monster? Every single time I play D&D has been some sort of like not great experience. So I've sort of decided in my life like that I'm just not interested in playing D&D. And because of that, I didn't want to play Baldur's Gate. Well, everybody on YouTube and in my bindery on Easy Cat Press voted for me to do a playthrough of Baldur's Gate. So I started playing Baldur's Gate, and wouldn't you know it, I fell in love. And I was like, I really like this game a lot. So then I was like, well, I don't know a lot about Dungeons & Dragons lore. I want to get more into that. And so I started looking at the books. And I know like the Legend of Drizzt is like the big one. Like that's the one that people say to read. The problem with that one is that that was not giving me the like Baldur's Gate vibes, because that is all about the Drow and the Underdark. And yeah, now I'm kind of into that where I'm playing Baldur's Gate. But I wanted something that, you know, was a little bit more like old school fantasy adventure. So I was doing some research and I came upon Azure Bonds. And let me tell you, oh boy, this book, I really loved this a lot. I mean, look, she's got a little dinosaur friend, okay? She's got a little dinosaur friend. So this is about a character named Alias. And she wakes up one day and she's like an adventurer. And she's like, well, it's weird. I can't remember how I got into this inn or the past several weeks of my life. And also there's a little dinosaur man at my window. What is going on? Then she discovers that she's got these tattoos on her arm that glow. And also when a wizard tries to like take them off or like do something with them, the tattoos make her attack him. So they got some like control powers over her. So she and her dinosaur friend and a wizard and eventually made a bard, and they go off on this adventure to try and like figure out like how she got these tattoos and see if she can get rid of them. And then there's like twists and turns along the way. And it is very old school, classic fantasy. like adventure, and I just had such a great time. I had such a time reading this book. It came out in 1988. It is a trilogy. It is a book that is hard to even find a good, like, decent cover image to post in a video. Like, you can see like the creases in this. Like, this is someone scanned this into their computer. Like, this is not a digital image. And I enjoyed this a lot. I'm going to be reading the rest of this trilogy and then kind of going more into the different Forgotten Realms stuff. I think I want to read more stuff in this realm, but this was just such a good time. This was so fun. I really loved all the characters. Alias is such a great main character. Her dinosaur friend, who is named Dragonbait, great character. All the characters so good. And it does have a lot of things that I like from Baldur's Gate. So it has like a group of adventurers kind of meeting and sort of trying to unravel this, like, possibly this thing that has some mind powers over you, which in hers is the tattoos. In Baldur's Gate, of course, it's the, you know, little wormies in your head. It has moments kind of like Baldur's Gate where she has like a dream that like gives her information about what she should do next. That kind of reminded me of Baldur's Gate. The way that the characters are like slowly trying to trust each other, but they're also kind of bad at trusting each other, reminds me of Baldur's Gate. Like, this is exactly what I was looking for when I wanted something to read that kind of was like Baldur's Gate adjacent. And I just had such a fun time reading it. So I'm excited to continue the trilogy and then hopefully read more books in the Forgotten Realms. I think that Forgotten Realms and this like D&D world is something that I'm going to focus a lot on in 2026. Like, I'm starting to kind of fall into that rabbit hole, and I'm having a really good time falling into that rabbit hole. So I'm excited to explore it more. And to that end, if you have recommendations of stuff like this in this realm, please feel free to drop them in the comments, because I'm going to be looking for more stuff like this as the year goes on. Also, I did not mention this at the top because this is such a bad image, you can't even see their names, but this was written by Kate Novak and Jeff Grubb. Those are the two authors here. Like I said, this is an image someone scanned into their scanner from 2002 to like sell this book on eBay. Like, it's the worst. And all the images of this book online, by the way, are equally terrible, which is like added to the excitement about this book. I'm just like, ooh, nobody knows about this. I mean, I'm sure a ton of people have read this and know about it, but to me, I felt like I was finding a little hidden gem, and that was really exciting too. So yeah, Azure Bonds. Excited to read more from this series. So that is everything that I read for the month. And of course, as you can see here, my read of the month was Death of the Author. This was just such a unique book. This was so interesting, so engaging, so different than anything else on my bookshelf, really. I really enjoyed the realness and humanity of the characters. I really enjoyed this like very interesting pseudo-futuristic look at where technology is going, but also just a look at people and how they interact with each other from an author's point of view. This really introspective look into when you get famous too quickly and aren't prepared for that, like what that can do to a person. I thought the way that disability rep is portrayed here is really unique as well. There's just so much intersectionality in this book, from the disability representation to the Nigerian representation, to the way that they're discussing robots, to the way that they're discussing literature and writing and giving your writing to the world and what the world does with your stories, and robotics. And there's just so much interesting things. And to top it all off, it has like one of the most incredible final chapters I've ever read in any book ever. This was just such a cool read and is for sure my book of the month. This is my favorite read of January. And on that note, let's take a little look forward into February and sort of my reading plan. So I actually did accomplish everything that I set out to read in January, if you remember my January reading plan. So that was really exciting. I may have overscheduled myself for February because I know that February is a shorter month. So hopefully this doesn't do me in, but I think it's actually not too bad. So let me kind of show you what we've got working with here. So the next thing on my shelf control project is I'm going to be reading the Assassin's Apprentice trilogy. I've read the first book before, but it's been long enough that I want to reread it and then read the other two. Those are on my shelf and I want to see if I enjoy them. I've never enjoyed the first book enough to keep going with the series, but I know that people speak so highly of this series that I want to try and give that trilogy like a really fair shot and decide if I want to go deeper into that world. So I'm going to be reading Assassin's Apprentice and the following two books. And then I am also going to be reading the other two books in the Forgotten Realms. So I did put Azure Bonds there because it's the trilogy, but technically I read that in January. I'm going to be reading the other two books in February. Those are not super long reads, so it shouldn't be too bad. For our book club this month, we are reading The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. This was voted upon by my Bindery members, and so I'm excited to read that. I've heard nothing but good things. Everyone I've talked to about The Everlasting has said it's really excellent. So I'm excited to jump into that. For sci-fi history, I only put one book on this month. Again, February is a shorter month, so I'm trying not to overextend myself, which is Brave New World. I think I maybe read this in high school, but I also might have skimmed it, and I also might have Cliff Notes it. I don't remember. So I'm excited to read it again, or possibly for the first time. Who knows? And then for Discworld, I'm going to be reading Carpe Jugulum, which I'm very excited. I think it has to do with the witches, I think. And it also is supposed to be kind of making fun of like Dracula lore. And that to me is much more interesting than like making fun of Australia. I have a good feeling about this one. I think it's going to be a winner. So I have a reread here, which is Ander and Santi Were Here. I recently did a video about how much I love this book. And basically here's what's happening. So I'm going to be going to Love Y'all, which is a book festival in Atlanta, Georgia. I live in Orlando, and we have decided we're going to drive up to it. So normally we would fly, but because it's like not terribly far, I decided that I wanted to drive. I love a long drive. I love driving. I love a long kind of road trip situation. And it's also nice because then I have a car while I'm there. I fly a lot for work. I travel a lot, but I actually really don't like flying. And I feel like the more I fly, the less I like it. So any chance I have to go to something where I can just drive to it, I like to take that opportunity to drive. So long-winded how we got here. But basically, when we go on long trips like this, I like to listen to an audiobook. It keeps me alert and awake while I'm driving, much better than music. And Carl is going to be with me. And so we were discussing what we wanted to read on the way there through an audiobook. And the author, Johnny Garzavia, is going to be at Love Y'all. And Ander and Santi Were Here is one of my favorite books of all time. And Carl has never read it. So we thought this would be a really fun opportunity for him to get to read it and for me to get to reread it. So I think that will be a lot of fun. And any excuse I have to reread Ander and Santi Were Here, I always am going to take, especially with everything going on in the world right now. This is a very relevant book. I love this book. I love this book, and I cannot wait to read it again. And then, of course, I just put Animorphs. I don't know how many Animorphs books I'll read in February. I just put Animorphs. I'm going to try and read at least a couple of them throughout the month, kind of as like palate cleansers between other stuff. They're very short and sweet. I've already started book 2, and so I'm going to be continuing to read Animorphs, and that will just be like a little side part of my book content throughout the month. And then I'll kind of regroup with you and tell you which ones I read at the end of the month. And finally, for my nonfiction, I'm going to be reading Swole, which I think is a memoir that deals with a bodybuilder. I know it sounds a little crazy, but it was highly recommended to me, and it's a book that I have. So for the nonfiction books I'm reading for right now, I'm trying to focus on books that I've already purchased, that are books I already have, rather than going out and finding new ones, because I have several nonfiction books that I bought when I was getting into nonfiction and then never got to because I kind of fell off. So I'm trying to read those first. So Swole is one of those. Again, it is also on the shorter side. And because I know that Assassin's Apprentice is going to be a longer beast of a thing to get through, I tried to pick a nonfiction book this month that was a little on the shorter side so that I didn't overextend myself this month. I am not going to be doing a Star Wars book next month unless I finish all of this. If I finish all of this, then I'll do a Star Wars book. Quite frankly, I enjoyed the X-Wing books, but I was so annoyed by how much noise was in those audiobooks. I know it sounds like a little thing, and I know a lot of people love the sound effects, but it so frustrated me that I kind of was at a point at the end of the month where I was like, I need a break. I need a Star Wars break for a month. So if I finish all of this, then the next thing I would go to would be a Star Wars book. But otherwise, I'm going to wait until March to jump back in, just so I like cleanse my palate a little bit of that bad experience, if that makes sense. And on that note, that is everything that I read in January, and that is everything I am planning to read in February. I'm so curious to know, what are your thoughts on any of the books that I discussed today? Have you read any of them? What did you read in January, and what was your read of the month? Like, what was your favorite thing that you read in January? I'm so curious to hear about that as well. And have you read any of the books that I'm planning to read in February? Will you be joining us for our book club? And what do you think? Do you have any thoughts? Are you excited for reviews of any of these? Are any of these on your TBR? You've been considering reading them? I'd love to know that as well. As I mentioned, I am going to be at Love Y'all, so if you're going to be there, feel free to come say hi. I'm going to be doing 2 different panels. One is a panel about like content creating, and the other panel is actually a live recording of the panelists' podcast. So I'm very excited about that. So if you're there, please come to those panels, but also just if you see me there, feel free to say hi. I would love to meet you. That would be a lot of fun. Otherwise, that is all the books I have to talk to you about today. I hope you had a good January, and I hope you have a wonderful February ahead. This is, of course, YouTube, so if you enjoy my content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. That way I know that you enjoy this content and want to see more of it. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading. Oh, hey, You're still here! Still thinking about these shelves, huh? These games? This table? Well, don't worry, friend. Head to allplay.com. They've got all of your gaming, shelving, tabling needs. Go on over there and get some games of your own. Stop ogling mine. It's getting weird.